Hey, Jen, as you mentioned, we have James Tallarico joining us tonight from Texas during his Texas Senate campaign. And I'm going to ask him if he agrees with Donald Trump's decision to cut funding for Medicare prescription drug benefits for people who were helped in that funding by Joe Biden's provisions that Donald Trump has now decided to end right in the middle of important Senate campaigns.
And people will learn in the fall, which is crazy. I just asked Josh Turk about this, who I know you spoke with, who could be the next senator from Iowa. It really is a reminder of the stark contrast here, isn't it? These Senate candidates.
Yeah, and it shows you how difficult it is to be a Republican candidate for Senate with Donald Trump as president.
And having to answer for his policies. It's a real challenge.
Every single one of those Trump policies, that's right.
Exactly.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Well, Donald Trump has achieved the worst polling ever for an American commander-in-chief during wartime. 72% of Americans disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling his war in Iran. The war Donald Trump started. Not one of the three presidents who presided over the Vietnam War had such a negative polling of their handling of that disastrous war. And Republican senators continue to vote to approve Donald Trump's war in Iran every time the Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer forces a vote on limiting Donald Trump's war powers. Ohio Senator Bernie Moreno has voted to approve Donald Trump's war every single time it has come to a vote in the United States Senate. And today, Senator Moreno tried to take on the role of my cousin Vinny in the United States Senate.
Who the fuck do you think you were for doing that? If you're in deep shit, that's who you call. Do you feel like you're in deep shit?
Of course, if Joe Pesci were playing the kind of character he played in My Cousin Vinny as a United States Senator, at least he'd be funny. Bernie Moreno's one and only contribution to the United States Senate in his first term as a senator has been to introduce punk profanity to Senate proceedings. That's his big Senate achievement. Bernie Moreno's target in that hearing today was a man who has done more in service to this country and the world than every senator in that room and the entire current United States Senate combined. Dr. Anthony Fauci. There was a time in Dr. Fauci's 54-year career where no one hated or pretended to hate Dr. Fauci. No one lied about him. Here is Republican Vice President George H.W. Bush in 1988.
Who are the heroes who are there in American life today? Who are the ones that you would point out to young Americans as figures who should inspire this country?
I think of Dr. Fauci. Probably never heard of him. You did, and heard of him. He's a very fine research, top doctor at National Institute of Health, working hard doing something about research on this disease of AIDS.
And here is President George W. Bush in 2008.
Those who know Tony do admit one flaw. Sometimes he forgets to stop working. He regularly puts in 80-hour weeks. And from time to time, he's even found notes on his windshield left by his co-workers that say things like, "Go home, you're making me feel guilty."
No Republican senator mentioned today that on his last day in office on January 19th, 2021, Donald Trump gave Dr. Fauci the Presidential Commendation. The New York Times called today's hearing, quote, "a useless drama that offered zero insights." The chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Rand Paul, who called today's hearing, has for years falsely claimed that Dr. Fauci refused to ever consider the possibility that COVID-19 originated in an infectious disease laboratory in Wuhan, China. Dr. Fauci has said repeatedly for years that he did consider that theory. He has examined possible sources of the virus, including a deliberate or accidental leak from that lab in China. And Dr. Fauci has concluded that it is more likely to have originated in nature. Like most scientists studying the issue, Dr. Fauci has never said the exact origin of the COVID-19 virus has been scientifically proved. Rand Paul released 1,000 pages of Dr. Fauci's diary-like notes that Dr. Fauci kept on his office computer, which remained in government custody when he left government service. The New York Times reports, quote, "The diary does not provide the smoking gun the senator is seeking. Rather, it echoes past disclosures showing Dr. Fauci wrestling with a fast-moving crisis as scientists' views evolved." In fact, the diary entries show that in the earliest days of Dr. Fauci's concern about COVID-19, before most of us had even heard of COVID-19, Dr. Fauci was convening a meeting to discuss the possibility of the Wuhan lab having leaked the virus, accidentally or deliberately. And that diary information is not news, because in February of 2020, before most of us even began to worry about COVID-19, Dr. Fauci told USA Today that they were considering the possibility of a lab leak as the origin. Senator Richard Blumenthal reminded the committee of those dark days in 2020.
I want to go back to the dark days of the coronavirus pandemic, one of the darkest days or times in our history. Hospitals were overflowing, Navy medical ships were docked in the Hudson River, emergency rooms were forced into unprecedented triaging during the worst week of the pandemic, which happens to have been the last week of President Trump's first term. More than 25,000 Americans died of COVID-19. Easy to forget those dark days. But for the past 18 months, the Trump administration has been engaged in a campaign to rewrite this history. And today's proceeding, I fear, is part of that effort. One of the darkest days in our Senate's history.
One of the darkest days in our Senate's history. That is exactly what it was. Republican senators disgraced themselves today, attacking the man who saved lives, possibly millions of lives, during the COVID-19 outbreak. The man who helped speed the development of a vaccine because of the research that he had led and supported on exactly that kind of virus for years before the outbreak of the pandemic, in anticipation of exactly the kind of pandemic that hit the world in 2020. That's why that vaccine that has saved so many of our lives reached us so quickly. And not one senator in that room today did one thing to save a single life during the COVID-19 pandemic. Not one of them, but they lined up to get their COVID-19 vaccine shots as soon as they possibly could, and they never thanked Dr. Fauci for helping speed the development of that vaccine. Anthony Fauci has been attacked before. In the 1980s, when AIDS suddenly began its deadly rampage in the United States, Dr. Fauci led the medical response. He directed and supported research. He directed and supported possible therapeutic treatments and experimental treatments. As more and more people died every day, the communities that that disease was ravaging protested. And Dr. Fauci sympathized with the protesters.
There is a feeling among members of any of a number of professions or just the general population that patients with AIDS, many of whom are homosexual, are a little bit different. I think that has led to a little bit of a complacency about the approach towards this disease.
Some frustrated and agonized AIDS activists came to Washington and hung Dr. Fauci in effigy outside his office building, objecting to the pace of his work. Dr. Fauci knew that he had to continue his careful, deliberate, scientific approach, but he also felt compelled to explain what he was doing and why it wasn't happening faster. And so he met with the people who attacked him. Dr. Fauci went to Greenwich Village, he went to San Francisco, he met with AIDS activists there, some of whom were calling him a murderer. He listened and he sympathized with them. The loudest and most eloquent voice among the protesters was the playwright Larry Kramer. Larry Kramer screamed at Dr. Fauci repeatedly, called him a murderer, and eventually befriended Tony Fauci as he came to realize that Dr. Fauci was the most effective ally that AIDS activists had. And years later, many years later, after having lived to the age of 84 while being HIV positive, thanks to the medical advances supported by Dr. Fauci, Larry Kramer, on his deathbed, had these last words for his visitor, Tony Fauci. "I love you, Tony." Dr. Fauci said through his tears, "I love you, Larry." Dr. Fauci noted that kind of protest in his diaries in various ways. The Fauci diaries released by Rand Paul revealed someone else saying, "I love you, Tony." The June 2nd, 2020 entry in Dr. Fauci's diary says, quote, "As usual, POTUS was very warm and friendly with me. When he walked into the Oval with us waiting, I was standing next to the door and he said, 'I love you, Tony. I feel like giving you a big hug.'" Rand Paul didn't quote that diary entry today. Some news accounts of Dr. Fauci's diary which reads as a straightforward description and actual accounting of what was happening to him every day, almost all of which is about the virus he was trying to conquer, find fault with Dr. Fauci for recording things that actually happened to him, like phone calls with Barbara Streisand and other celebrities. Dr. Fauci has been accused of name dropping in his diary, which is impossible because he's name dropping in a document that no one else was ever supposed to read. He mentions names like Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Francis Ford Coppola, all in the same sentence, actually, because he mentions them in a diary entry about receiving the Leonardo da Vinci Award from the Italian American Foundation. And so, yeah, some famous Italian Americans were there. The most famous Italian Americans were there. And I don't know anyone who's met those people who hasn't made some kind of note about it and told someone about it. And so Dr. Fauci mentioned those names to his diary, where there is no bragging. There's no bragging in that diary. It's a record of who he met, who he talked to. There's no excitement. There's no glee about the surge in his fame that he records in his diary. He marvels at the weirdness of it, as has every single person in the history of massive rocketing surges in personal fame. Whenever that happens, people find it strange and disorienting, and that's what Dr. Fauci records, that it was strange and disorienting. 99% of his diary during the COVID-19 pandemic is about the COVID-19 pandemic. There is nothing in the diary that reeks of vanity. Rand Paul has said that Dr. Fauci should be in prison without ever once having named an actual crime that Dr. Fauci could ever be charged with. Anthony Fauci, who has testified to Congress possibly more than any other American in history, decided that today would be different.
You haven't seen the sun in days. So at this point, it'd be easier to just fly to it.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Peters, members of the committee, I served at the NIH for over 54 years, 38 of those as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Over that period, I proved that I believe in and respect the value of legitimate congressional oversight. In fact, I testified before and/or briefed Senate and House Senate and House committees well over 200 times over those 38 years. During and after the COVID pandemic, I have appeared multiple times for hearings in the Senate and the House, usually under oath, and sat for several days-long transcribed sworn interviews, answering questions about the very issues that are now the subject of this hearing. However, given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote. Any reasonable person who has followed his unhinged obsession with me would readily come to the same conclusion. Therefore, although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress, under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions. Thank you.
And that led Rand Paul to turn his hearing room into the most disgraceful Stalinist tribunal the United States Senate has ever seen.
It's against the law to obstruct an investigation of Congress. There will be repercussions to your refusal to testify today. Senator Peters. You're not recognized. You're not recognized. If you are unruly, you will be removed from the proceeding. You are not recognized, and you are not recognized, sir. Sir, you are not recognized. You are not recognized. Security, we'll hold off. But you will respect these proceedings. You were told not to sit at the table. You insist on sitting at the table, and we told you would not be recognized. You are not invited here for testimony, sir. You are being disruptive. Would you behave this way in a courtroom? No, because the judge would put you in jail. I can't do that today, but I can have you escorted from the premises. So I would say, sir, sit quietly and don't say another word. I said, sit quietly, you are not recognized. Another word and you're gone.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear what the attorney has to say.
He is not recognized by the committee or the chair. If he speaks again, he will be removed from the room. This testimony is from Anthony Fauci. This is not a game with his lawyers. He can advise, his lawyers can give him advice. He's got a half dozen here. They're all allowed to talk to him.
Yes.
All right? But the attorneys are not recognized. In fact, the attorney was told not to sit at the table, and he's not obeying that recommendation. There's a row behind you, sir. That's where you were told to sit, and you're not. And now you're disrupting the proceedings. And so, look, this is the way Anthony Fauci wants to be remembered. For a lawyer not listening to the rules. That's the way you want to be remembered, and that's what you're going to do. You are not recognized, sir. Security, please remove him from the room.
Throwing the lawyer out of the room Joe McCarthy at his worst never did that. Joe McCarthy was an alcoholic Republican senator conducting phony witch hunts of suspected communists in the 1950s in a Senate hearing room, and he never did what Rand Paul did today. Throw the lawyer out of the room. That is how weak and lost and deranged a committee chairman Rand Paul is. Senator Blumenthal was right. It was one of the darkest days in our Senate's history. Anthony Fauci helped save millions of lives with his work on HIV medications. He expanded his life-saving reach to Africa with the support of George W. Bush by creating a President's Emergency Fund to support AIDS treatment in Africa that saved over 25 million lives before Elon Musk and Donald Trump decided that those lives were not worth saving. Not one Republican congressional committee, not one Republican senator is investigating how many thousands of people have died because Donald Trump and Elon Musk took their life-saving HIV medicine away. Not one Republican congressional committee is investigating how many babies have starved to death because Elon Musk decided to let food supplies that had already been delivered to Africa rot in warehouses instead of distributing that food to starving people. That is the Republican contribution to public health in today's world, and not one Republican senator has ever objected to taking that food assistance away from starving children and starving mothers and starving grandmothers, and taking life-saving medicine away from people who cannot get that life-saving medicine any other way. The life-saving medicine that Dr. Anthony Fauci helped them get. There is no higher calling than saving lives. There is nothing we could ever do more important than saving a single life. And most of us will never know that feeling of saving a life. And all of us owe our gratitude to Anthony Fauci, and many of us may owe our lives to Anthony Fauci. And Anthony Fauci owes nothing to Republicans in the United States Senate. He does not owe them an answer to a single question. He's already answered every one of the questions that they were throwing around that room today. He's answered them many times in congressional testimony and in other interviews. Every one of them, every one of those questions, he's answered in previous appearances. Sometimes news stories come down to a very simple right and wrong, and this is one of them. Anthony Fauci is right, and every one of those Republican senators is very, very wrong. Coming up, we have breaking news in the next segment. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee have been forced to postpone tomorrow's confirmation vote for Todd Blanche as Attorney General. That nomination is now in trouble tonight. Andrew Weissman will join us next.
Good morning. This is Elder G. God can woke us up one more time. God can start us on our way. God can clothe us in our right mind, and all of our limbs are working properly. You see how those prejudiced white people is? Remember how they treated Hunter Biden? Remember how they put a special counsel on Joe Biden? Remember all the time that they guard President Trump? How many times he took the Fifth Amendment? How many times did Rand Paul call that lying president to a hearing in the Senate? I don't know Dr. Fauci personally. I don't know what he believes. But whatever he believes, that's his own business. Dr. Fauci, he's an American citizen. So under the Constitution, he have the freedom of his religion. He has the freedom to take the Fifth Amendment. How many times have President Trump, Jim Jordan, he never even answered his subpoena. Jim Jordan in the House of Representatives was a wrestling coach at Ohio State. Coach Sandusky was molesting children in the gym, and Jim Jordan saw them. Jim Jordan watched young boys as young as 13 years old at Ohio State get molested, and Jim Jordan did nothing. Jim Jordan let President Trump try to overthrow the government, try to put fake electors, and Jim Jordan did nothing. And Rand Paul did nothing. These are nothing but fake, phonies, and frauds. That's all they are.
That is something that Todd Blanche personally signed. Indeed, it appears no one else was willing to sign it, and Todd Blanche did. Can I just take a moment there to say on a different subject, although it is related, that I am so grateful to you for calling out just how much Dr. Fauci is a national hero, and how much we owe him a debt of gratitude. And it is so understandable why he would be forced to take the Fifth Amendment, given people like Todd Blanche and Senator Paul, in terms of just how reckless they are behaving. I would have given that exact same advice to Dr. Fauci, but it is a sad day for this country to see that spectacle for somebody who we owe so much to, who has lived a life of public service and saved so many lives. So thank you for covering that.
Such an important point, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And coming up, a new poll of Texas voters shows our next guest, Democrat James Tallarico, ahead of Donald Trump's pick for United States Senate. James Tallarico joins us next. In Texas, a new poll shows Democratic nominee for Senate James Tallarico leading Texas Republican Attorney General Ken Paxton by 5 points, 45 to 40. That poll is still within the margin of error, and it is the largest lead James Tallarico has had in any public general election poll. Today, the campaigns announced they have agreed to debate 3 times this fall after James Tallarico challenged Ken Paxton to a series of debates. Last night, James Tallarico made his case to voters in Lockhart, Texas.
We have an affordability crisis because we have a corruption crisis. We don't have a government of, by, and for the people. Things would be different if we did. We have a government of, by, and for the billionaires. The system is working exactly as it was intended to work. There is something broken in America. This is not just a political battle. This is a spiritual battle between selfishness and service, between greed and greatness, real greatness. I think after decades of this corruption, we are on the cusp of returning to those old-fashioned values, the values of my great-grandfather, the values of the greatest generation, service, sacrifice, doing what's right even when no one is watching. Ken Paxton has been selling us out for years, for decades, and he's gotten away with it. They've all gotten away with it. But that ends this year, in this state, in this race.
Pods' last sale of the summer has been extended. Save up to 30% until August 17th at pods.com.
On teachers to their local school system. That continues.
us now is Texas State Representative James Tallarico, Democratic nominee for United States Senate, Texas. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. In that clip we just showed, you led with affordability, but you joined it to another major issue, which I think is it's a framing that I haven't heard before. When you said we have an affordability crisis because we have a corruption crisis. Those are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I've been traveling to every corner of Texas, big cities, small towns like Lockhart, red areas, blue areas alike, and everywhere I go, I hear from Texans. I hear about the struggles to afford the basics. Texans are drowning, and it's not like we're spending money on nice clothes or nice cars or nice vacations. We're spending our money on the necessities: groceries, gas, healthcare, insurance, utilities. And it's because for 50 years, puppet politicians like Ken Paxton have been rigging this economy in favor of their billionaire mega donors at our expense. And it's been theft. I mean, trickle-down economics is not a theory, it is theft. And it's been with their bribes, their bailouts, their billionaire tax breaks, they've been stealing from the American people. This affordability crisis has really hit its peak, especially over the last few years as prices have skyrocketed. But it's been a problem 50 years in the making. Our wages, our income, our pay has remained stagnant or it's declined. Our power in the economy has been chipped away at. And so we're trying to tell the big story about what's happened to the middle class in this country. And it's not a problem just over the last 5 years, it's a problem over the last 50 years.
So Donald Trump has just decided to cut funding for Medicare prescription drug benefits, Medicare being a crucial program Americans have been relying on since the really most powerful Democratic politician in Texas history, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, signed Medicare into law. This is from the same president who said yesterday, once again, I just want to try to get his quote exactly right. He said, this word affordability is made up by the Democrats. So affordability is made up by the Democrats, and he seems to think people will have no trouble spending more money to afford prescription drugs on Medicare.
Well, the president needs to get out of the White House and get out in the country and hear from Americans about the struggles that they're facing, because healthcare is just one of them, but it's also housing, it's also childcare, which is now more expensive than college in the state of Texas. The middle class has been decimated in this country. You mentioned Lyndon Johnson. This is LBJ's Senate seat that I'm running for. It was a Texas Democrat who signed Medicare into law, who signed Medicaid into law, who signed Head Start and Title I into law, who signed the Voting Rights Act into law. And bit by bit, this administration has chipped away at the Great Society, has chipped away at the middle class. And the fight in this country is not really left versus right, it is top versus bottom. It's all of us, whether you're a little more conservative or a little more progressive, it's all of us coming together to take on the people at the top, the billionaires and their puppet politicians like Ken Paxton, who have been screwing us over for far too long. That's the movement we're building in Texas, and it's why you're seeing us make this progress, because we are bringing working people together to take on this corruption so we can lower our costs.
So you've agreed to these three debates, scheduled September 22nd, all Tuesdays, September 22nd, October 6th, October 13th. Ken Paxton and the Republican TV ad campaign has been throwing all sorts of junk at you. And so this first time we're going to see you confronting this very directly with Paxton will be September 22nd. Do you expect him to bring into the debate all the kinds of insulting junk he's been throwing around?
Well, Ken Paxton has not accepted any of these debates yet. When I get tough questions, I answer them. When Ken Paxton gets tough questions, he runs away, literally runs away from reporters, from voters, from anyone asking hard questions. If you've given an Epstein-style sweetheart deal to an admitted child predator, you should have to answer the public's questions. If you were reported to the FBI for bribery by your own staff, you should have to answer the public's questions. If you become a multimillionaire on a government salary and now own 15 homes on the public's dime, then you should have to answer the public's questions. I get it. If I had Ken Paxton's record of corruption, I wouldn't want to answer these questions either. But he's asking for your vote. He is asking for your trust. And the people of Texas deserve answers. So I've challenged Ken Paxton to these 3 televised debates. The networks have already set the dates and the times and the locations. We're just waiting on Ken Paxton. I'm not afraid of tough questions. We'll see if Ken Paxton can say the same.
So there could be an empty chair at these debates.
There might be. And Ken Paxton has a long history of saying one thing and doing another, of promising to show up and then not showing up. And so I'll believe it when he walks onto that debate stage. I think that the people of Texas deserve answers to their very legitimate questions about his career of corruption. He hasn't debated in more than a decade. He hasn't made himself available to questions from the public. And I think that should end this November as Texans face this very important choice on November 3rd.
James Talarico, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Elon Musk, who was described by Bill Gates as the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children, was confronted by an interviewer about who has died because he destroyed the United States Agency for International Development. You'll see Elon Musk's answer next.
I started Red's Boutique 15 years ago. We currently have 8 employees. Everybody is cost conscious right now.
Tonight, we're live outside the Pope's Summer Palace in Italy, where we spoke with the first American Pope as he hosted a concert for the world.
The Concert for Peace, helping to bring the world together.
This is the experience of beauty.
And my time with Pope Leo, his most extensive
This is LG again. You see how these false preachers, how they done took God's word and how they done turned it into evil. That's what, when the Bible is talking about that Satan and his angels is able to transform themselves into light. What they saying is that the devil and their angels, they can go to church just like you. They can sing in the choir just like you. They can be an usher just like you. And Satan, he's able to trans himself into a Christ-like figure. But we the people that believe, we supposed to see through all of that. Everybody know, if you ask any question, everybody know. I don't know what his faith is or what he believes, but everybody know Anthony Fauci is a good man. He cares about people. He tried to help get rid of diseases that's gonna kill us. And President Trump and his white national wanna make Dr. Fauci look bad just because Dr. Fauci wanna save a homosexual life. Just because Dr. Fauci wanna help poor people instead of letting poor people just die. RFK Jr. and all these no good people that he put in the health field, all those people doing is destroying this country because of hate. One day, you're going to have to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. One day, you're going to have to give a full account of all your evil deeds. And the Bible says, in that day, It's going to be a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth. Thank you.